Welcome to the Tenant Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson here in Denver, Colorado, and joining me this evening is my friend and co-host extraordinaire, Wes Brown in Rapid City, South Dakota.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. I'm going to keep that. Co-host extraordinaire.
I debated whether or not to use that tonight or to kind of save it, but
save it for later.
You know what?
Well, this is a good night to be extraordinaire. So hopefully I can live up to that title. It's great to see you, Todd. Looking forward to this episode with Dan. This is going to be great.
So our guest tonight is a phenomenal artist that we've been wanting to have on for a while. His name is Daniel Sprick. And if you're in the know, you've probably heard of Dan and know his work, but he is a phenomenal artist. In conversation with a number of other artists that we've interviewed, his name continually comes up in conversation. So Dan, how are you?
Well, I'm really, really well. And I appreciate hearing that report. It's so nice to be, thought of by other artists. And Lee Lavier is the one who first introduced me to what you were doing. So how'd you get the title Tenant?
That's a good question. We kicked around a number of names, and this is the one that stuck.
We always want to kind of understand what's the basis why artists do what they do and that. So I think it kind of rang true. So that's kind of where we went with it.
Tenant means to hold. Well, Latin, tenere.
Yeah. Principle or belief system. We thought, that's applicable to a lot of different things. So we'll call it tenant. And we thought it would look great as a graphic on a T-shirt. So,
very. Have you been doing this for years?
No, actually, we just started in November, and this show will be our 42nd episode, right, Wes?
Yes.
Remarkable. You've got quite a catalog since November. Remarkable. Wow.
Yeah, we've been able to talk to a lot of amazing artists, and we've received a lot of great feedback. So, and we're excited that you were willing to come on and talk about your art and introduce people that don't know who you are as an artist.
Well, thank you.
We always like to start off, or I always like to start off. I don't know how Wes feels after 42 episodes, but I always love to hear the backstory of how you became an artist, like where you're from, where you grew up. I know you were born in Little Rock, Arkansas. But how did you end up in Denver?
Well, actually, when I was 6 years old, younger than that, 5, my family moved to Glenwood Springs, Colorado. And I started drawing about that time. And my father just showed me how to draw. I can still see it in my head. It was a cross-section of a biplane. And it was kind of more of a mechanical drawing, really, than a three-dimensional rendering. But it just took hold of my imagination, and I've been drawing ever since. That's been my life. It just has completely, I think it was just a miracle to me to see this image just appear on paper, just from a pencil, in his hand moving. And he wasn't any practiced artist at all, but he had enough temporospatial kind of understanding to put the right thing in the right place, and drew a great airplane. And so I just got hooked on it right then and there, and I've been drawing ever since. And I think that early curiosity about it and drive and passion for it has been an advantage for me, because it's really never waned.
So what was special about the airplane?
Well, it could have been anything, but it was just something he picked out of the blue, really. And he knew something about airplanes. He'd been a pilot before I was born for a little while, not a career pilot. And so that was a subject he knew. And he built a lot of model airplanes when he was a kid. So it was pretty much in his consciousness. He himself, his work was making dental prostheses, which is really a type of sculpture to make, carve each tooth. So he was a really, highly developed craftsman in his own right. Not so much drawing, but, enough to show a kid. And you don't have to be very advanced to get a kid started.
Well, and that, what your dad did, that's really kind of an art form in itself. I mean, people might not think of it that way, but yeah, I mean, very much a craft, an art form. And as far as carving teeth, I can't imagine, very meticulous work, I imagine.
It really was. It was sculptural. It was pure sculpture. I don't think it's done that way now. It's done with computer modeling and molds and 3D printing, or however they do it. It's different now, but in those days it was really carved out of, with porcelain and laid up, and had, degrees of translucency where needed, because teeth have, some translucency at the top and opacity at the bottoms where they're thicker. It's pretty, and so he incorporated all that in porcelain. I think it's kind of amazing.
It is amazing.
He did work in our basement, and there were 6 of his kids tearing the house apart and pulling each other's hair and getting in fights, and, making messes. And my dad he really kind of had a short fuse, yet he survived it and dealt with it and put up with us. And it made it through. I think it was a high stress job, actually. And we only compounded the stresses, not realizing what we were doing. We were kids.
Yeah. I mean, it's controlled chaos, especially if you come from a large family, right?
6 of those kids.
He started you drawing, and then you just continued to draw all the way through school?
I did. Although there was a time when I was a teenager, I got a little bit self-conscious or embarrassed about it, which is kind of crazy. And so at that point, I went into auto mechanics and, welding and things like that. And I got back into art when I was about 20 years old. So there was a lapse throughout my teen years. But enough of an early start to, I think, give me an advantage in terms of, spatial recognition and placement, interval and line.
Yeah, and perspective. And
I also got into building model airplanes, and I've kind of forgotten this, but and gliders, that you just toss, and even just simple ones that flew pretty well. And one of the things I loved was that when you launch a glider, you can watch it kind of rise and fall and undulate, and it carves a line in the air, which is really quite beautiful. It's kind of elliptical in its oscillations, is one way to put it, until it finally hits the ground with a thud.
So did you make these gliders out of balsa wood?
Yeah, lots of the, dime ones so that's not really anything, invented. You just assemble them. But I also did make them out of, balsa wood and tissue paper and, with ribs and spars and longerons and all the components of an airplane, the way that real airplanes are built. Fabric and steel tube airplanes, but this was balsa wood and tissue paper. It's a skeleton with a skin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Most of those didn't fly that well because they were just too darn heavy. But still, I loved it.
Yeah, and actually making them probably was really cool. Putting in the time.
It was, and I designed my own. I had little patience for kits, and now I think I'm kind of glad of that. At the time, I didn't know there was anything special about designing your own. It's just that I didn't see the purpose.
But it probably kind of sets you up to understand, this is probably pushing too far, but understanding the base structure, the structure underneath the skeleton of the figure in essence, it helped to build that perspective of it maybe.
I think so. It's from the inside out, really. And I had little interest in snapping together plastic models that you glue together. It just, I don't know, I just couldn't stay interested in that. But to design your own, that was cool.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's a decent early start. Kids, anything like that, building blocks or whatever you're doing, is a really good foundation for kids to become engineers or artists or sculptors or whatever kind of carpenters, furniture makers, whatever it is you really love to do. That's a kind of a good start, I think.
Yeah, that trial and error aspect of trying to build a better machine or experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the catalyst that, because you said you kind of experimented and did some other stuff, and then you went to college, but it wasn't necessarily for art. What was the catalyst that got you back into your artwork?
Well, for one thing, I didn't know that there was such thing as an artist until I went to college, basically. I mean, we did have some high school art classes, that's true, but that an artist was a thing that you could be, and there was such thing as art history. And I discovered that, in my first years at Mesa College in Grand Junction, Colorado, and it just kind of blew my mind that there was centuries and centuries of history to this. And it was just, I just started out just as naive as any kid is naturally going to be. And so it was a world that has opened up, and it hasn't stopped unfolding. Because, the study of art history, you can study it all your life and still only know a fraction of it. And the same with drawing and painting. To me, it's still on the ascendancy. And I've been doing this, it's really full time since I was 20, and I'm 67 now. And it's not slowing down. It has occurred to me that I've done enough quantity for a lifetime, but the thing of it is, there's opportunity, there's still growth. There's still a way to make it, I think, just more true and beautiful, I think, and meaningful. And so that's what I'm trying to do. That's why I keep doing it. And it's why I don't lose interest, because it's elusive and yet it has possible growth. And it's not a steady upward trajectory by any means, because sometimes it declines and you go through bad periods and then up again. But generally, I think the long view is that it zigzags upward still. And I'm fully aware that there will come a time in life where it begins to decline, because when you get older, you lose abilities and then eventually die. So I'm hastily in a race with time, basically, until my abilities decline. It's going to happen with absolutely everyone on earth. And there's no time to waste.
I watched an interview with you, and maybe you said it. Why should we continue after all the masters have done everything they did? How can we make it any better? And you said, not only do we think we can be as good as they are, but we can make it even better. We can move it even further out. How did you come to that conclusion?
Well, there's some hubris there, which, I'll own that. And it's, certainly get yourself in a lot of trouble. If we had to be limited and felt like we could never achieve what has been done in the past and then surpass it, why do it at all?
Right.
Then they've done it for us and there's no need. And I do think that we can. I think it's possible in our time. I do. For me, the 20th century has not been an improvement in art. It's been a step backward. And not everyone's going to agree with me, but I think it's time for it to move forward again. To me, it's a period where art has been really the last 100 years. It's been more about esoteric ideas and very little discussion of beauty. And what could be more important than beauty? The beauty is difficult, I know that. It's practically impossible, but not entirely. And so that's what I'm attempting to produce. Well, back to the old masters. You know what? That ties into something that there's a lot of words, a vocabulary I don't use. I don't use the word create or creative. I don't use the word genius, so I don't think it exists. Surely there's people with rapid firing synapses and better memories, but there's no such thing as a genius. It's somebody who just freaking fucking works hard and is persistent and never gives up and has an absolute determination. Sure, it helps to have some gifts and some advantages, but one reason I don't like the word genius is because there's something magical about it. And that person has advantages that you don't. And it's, therefore, why should I try? that I could never do what Leonardo or Michelangelo did or Raphael. They were geniuses, and I'll never be a genius. And you see, if you believe that, it's just a self-limiting factor. And, I'm afraid that's been a pervasive attitude in our time, in the 20th century. I think since the Impressionists, that a genius said, oh, genius, Picasso, because of doing something no one else had done. But it wasn't really executed with anything more than a perfunctory, need to get the job done and move on to the next one and do 3 or 4 or 5 a day. I think it was more about cleverness and about where originality matters more than quality. And I think if I had to choose one, I think I'd just take quality, even if it's not fully original, because I crave beauty more than calling attention to myself. And, if you think about, the artists of the Renaissance, much of the time they didn't even sign their works. They were craftsmen, and they just wanted things to be, beautiful for God and beautiful for its own beauty and for understanding and for the search of truth and just earnestness. And it wasn't about the cult of fame or individuality. It became that way slowly. But, I don't think Caravaggio signed one of his paintings, not a single one of them. Other artists of the time did. I know Vermeer signed his paintings. It was a little bit later than Caravaggio and a different part of Europe, of course. And there's one at least signed painting by Jan van Eyck, which that would be clear back in 1440 or so. But generally speaking, it wasn't about the individual. It was just about making things as good as you could make them. And I think that's why I don't care as much about originality. I don't strive for original. I don't try to reinvent the wheel. It's just that I'll take existing inventions and try to maybe develop them a little further. If I can bring art along, painting, if I can bring it 1 millimeter farther, add up everything that's ever been done and reverently, make a contribution to it. If I can bring it 1 millimeter of its million-mile journey, I think that's doing something. That'd be fine. I'd be satisfied with that. I'm not sure if I have, but it's what I tried.
I think you have. If you're talking about moving that needle, I look at your painting and I'm blown away.
Oh, thanks.
I'm a photographer. From a lighting standpoint, what you paint is amazing.
Thank you.
You have an incredible grasp of how light works. And I don't see that very often in general. Even in photography, sometimes you see, photographers showing their work and it's just okay. They don't have this understanding of light. You understand how light works. When I look at, when I first pulled up your website and started looking at it, at first I thought you were experimenting, with photographs in some way, like it was a multimedia thing because I wasn't familiar with your work. And then I started looking at it, I'm like, oh my God, these are paintings. And I'm like, who paints like that? Because not only do you understand light, you understand the quality of light, but you also understand, I was thinking about it today as I was looking closely at some of them, you understand the different like color temperature, which you never see. I see, the different highlights within highlights on a person's skin, and the way that a reflection that might come through the window, it might be a different quality of light, might be a cooler light, or it might be a warmer light from a different light source. All that's in your painting and in your portraits. Well, in your still lifes and your landscapes. Truly, I'm blown away. You just don't see that.
Thank you, Todd. That's really, that means a lot. I appreciate it greatly. It's really what I've devoted my whole life to. And I'm not done because I think it could go further still. And I think at this time in my life, what I'm really trying to do is unlock the secrets. I think there's something out there that still hasn't been discovered in aesthetics, and it just, and through nothing but paint and applied with just, composition, distribution, harmonies, color harmonies, intervals, just the things that exist. And because I think there's still things possible. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I love that you're at this incredible level and you're still thinking, I have more to explore. There's something more out there that I'm going to push this as far as I can. And I think there's a lot of people that would reach that level of their craft, of their art, and say, okay, I'm good. But I love the fact that you have such a curious mind that you're wanting to push it even further. So I'm interested to see where that goes.
Thank you. Well, I'll keep you posted. It's an attempt. That's what it is. And it's not always, sometimes it's a decline. But I keep it going practically all the time. Lately, what I've been doing is painting out on location, painting, landscapes and street scenes set up outside. And I realize I can't really get the depth that, because it's such a short time, I can't get the kind of depth and quality that I really care for that I can get in studio painting. But I think it's like a conditioning exercise, if nothing else. Just if you're not in a race, you got to stay in condition. Although I don't race, that's a competitive term. But I mean, if you're not, you're always conditioning and just expanding your ability, and it may pay back in ways that you can't even predict, or it may never. But I think it makes me more inventive, really, as a painter. Because oftentimes when I'm working on a subject, I'm barely looking at it. Like a still life or a portrait, I start out with it, and then I'm hardly looking at it. I'm looking at the painting. I think the reason I started doing that is because painting scenes out on location, well, the light is changing constantly. And so what you started with isn't there anymore. So you're making stuff up or trying to remember roughly what it looks like. It's making stuff up, or more, politely said, inventing. But maybe that's one of those highfalutin words too. So I make shit up.
So do you kind of treat your, for lack of a better word, the plein air style painting in the street scenes, do you treat that as like a study, and then do you go back and recreate it in the studio, or is that a standalone piece and you're moving on?
It's usually a standalone piece. Early on in my life when I was doing that was with the intention of doing a studio piece. But mostly it's just an end in itself. I never do a thing with it. Or something may come up a long time later. For example, a few years ago, I painted a gas station on Federal Boulevard in Denver. And with no particular thought about what would happen to it afterwards. But later, I used that as a backdrop for a portrait of a man. So it can come back in ways that I didn't expect, but it wasn't on my mind at the time. So that happens, and if it does, fine. If it doesn't, that's fine too. I do like landscape backdrops for figures.
I'm actually looking at one of yours right now on my screen to the right here, and it's an older gentleman, sunglasses, really long beard, denim jacket in the background, kind of looks like a gas station. The thing that really struck me, and it's really beautifully done, and then his sleeve is translucent. You can see through his sleeve to the car behind him.
Well, okay, that's the one I was thinking of.
Okay.
So, I don't know. Amazing you queued that up at the same time. That's pretty cool. That is the one I was thinking of. Okay, the reason the sleeve is transparent, it was because it could make up something that's to tell a story that's that's interesting, but the truth is not very interesting. So I'll say it's for, esoteric spirit of transcendence. But the truth was, I needed the composition needed a light spot in the same place as elbow was. It was really for compositional reasons. I'm not that complex of a guy. It's just back to the problem solver.
It's a beautiful piece, though. I really like it. Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah.
Listen, you brought that up. That is the one I was thinking of. I painted this crucifix in New York. It's a life-size scene of it's a churchyard, and there's a stone crucifix, and it's a life-size figure, and you come around the corner and you see it, and it's a shock. And it was to me. I mean, then when you see it, you wouldn't be surprised anymore, but it just jars you. Other thing, you may walk through an alley and see a life-size silhouette spray painted on the wall and just startles you for a second. You in the millisecond, you think it's real. Well, I got that startle, and so I went back and painted it, and then I've got the idea to paint it as a real crucifixion, not a marble piece, but a poor guy nailed to a cross. I'm not above shock value sometimes, and it would be a shocking thing, and the painted crosswalk and telephone poles and all the things of our time. Somebody walking by with a stroller, because that was happening, on that street scene in Westchester, New York. But I haven't done it, and the only reason I mention it is because I sort of see it on the side of my photo album here.
You studied under Ramon Froman.
Yeah.
The pronunciation was Raymond Froman.
Oh, okay, Raymond Froman. Okay, so you studied under Raymond, and I'm a huge John Singer Sargent fan. Huge John Singer Sargent. So I'm really interested in your experience with him.
Well, he was a huge John Singer Sargent fan, and painted in the manner of Sargent, which a lot of artists of the 20th century had. And so you nailed it. Sargent and Zorn and Sorolla, but Sargent is a role model for me still, for a couple of reasons. One is that just like I'm doing this outdoor painting. It's kind of like I consider it my hobby art, and I think Sargent, it was his hobby art to go out, and his day job was painting portraits, but he was always painting something. And that's kind of, that is a role model for me. And I think that Sargent had a unique brilliance. To me, he was one of the most brilliant artists who ever lived, who in this rapid ability to make a synopsis, really, of encapsulate a scene very simply, and usually with, pretty great success. And then maybe he'd develop it, or maybe he'd leave it really simplified. I think these Italian scenes that he did when he was young were just extraordinary. But he never really lost it at all. I think later, though, sometimes he would start a thing but not really develop it, in my opinion. And I wish that he would take it further many times, but he doesn't listen to me. So I'm just going to have to be satisfied with that.
So I noticed in some of your paintings, you kind of leave edges unfinished, or their hair will go into a more expressionistic form. Is that kind of in the same vein?
Yeah. Well, hair is really expressive. And these years of my life, I've become more interested in expressionistic painting. And in Vincent van Gogh, there was a major exhibition here put on by my friend Timothy Standing, the curator at the Denver Art Museum. And I looked at it again. Years earlier, I might not have walked across the street to see it. And then I got a much keener appreciation of the way he would apply paint and the way he'd express himself with it. And I think those last paintings of his, that last period, Starry Night and the church at Overs that's all twisting up and spirals. He really, I think he did something new and unique there.
So I've read things, different people talking about your art, your painting, and they're always trying to categorize you or put you in a particular genre. And yet you paint so many different things. I think that would be hard to do. Does that bother you when people try to categorize what you do?
Hey, you just got to be glad if they're talking about you at all.
You just did Bob Ragland proud, because that's something Bob Ragland would say.
Shoot, I appreciate being thought of and noticed and in art, and that I think it's nice. And in some ways, people have a point. Is that because I'm all over the place, and it wouldn't hurt to be a little bit more, picked from all these options. But what I do about it really is that I do all these outdoor paintings, but I almost never exhibit them. I just do them and put them away, and I've got piles of them. What I figure I'll do is when I get old and can't paint anymore, I'll be trying to sell them. That's my retirement. It's my savings plan.
There you go. That's smart.
I like that.
Since I don't have any other savings. I just think if an artist has an impulse and wants to do something, they should do it. Even if it's completely out of keeping with what they're known for. It doesn't mean you should exhibit everything you do as an artist, but you certainly should follow your impulses, at least to the extent possible.
And that goes to being true to yourself. And we've actually been talking about this a lot lately, but listening to your voice, that voice. And I feel like you definitely follow your voice.
Well, thanks. 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 I appreciate it that it looks that way, because I do. I've not been swayed by the 20th century. I'm fairly unaffected by it. I think that the abstract expressionists pursued something with great sincerity. I don't doubt that. They worked like they meant it. And it was a grand experiment that nothing like that had been done historically. And but as for me, I think they covered the territory, and I just don't need to. And of course, it has gone to far more extremes in the last 70 years since the heyday of abstract expressionism. I guess I should say 60 years since. 60 years ago, they were overturned by pop art. And it's been a series of types of art since then. But I think that was the height of sincerity. And that is one thing that I have in common with abstract expressionists. And their sincerity was exactly what brought them down. Andy Warhol identified a weak point as a target, and he shot it. He was successful at that. But I also have the same weak point, I suppose you could say, or vulnerability would be a way to put it. And I don't care, because I'm really only doing it to pursue what I think will be beautiful and meaningful to me. And enough people appreciate it. I'm not changing the world. I'm not getting any attention from the contemporary art world, but that's understandable because I haven't tried. I'm grateful to have gotten an exhibition to the Denver Art Museum and the Museum of Outdoor Arts in Denver, and I get some museum shows now and then, but I'm not at all on the contemporary art radar that I know of, and it's fine.
You don't care?
I don't, because you know what? Oh, I'd rather have it than not have it, for sure. It's just like anyone who disses wealth is full of bullshit. It's much, they'd rather be wealthy than poor, but they also know that it's, and so I would rather be recognized by the art world than not, but also I'm fully aware that it wouldn't really permanently, profoundly increase my happiness. It'd feel good for a while, like winning a lottery. You'd feel lucky. You know what? In fact, there's luck is a major factor in the success in art. No matter how hard an artist works or how lazy he is, luck is just a factor. But that's nothing unusual historically. You really shouldn't let that get to you. I mean, just think, it would rain on one farmer's field and not the next. And it was just nothing to take personally. It didn't mean that God favored the wicked farmer and punished the good farmer. It's just the random nature of existence. Actually, and for that reason, maybe the 20th century existentialists had it right. There's no meaning, so don't look for it. And actually, that can save you a lot of trouble, save you a lot from a lot of disappointment if you think, like Sartre said, well, there's no meaning. So in some ways, as much as I love to follow religion and study religion, I'm just as happy thinking there's no meaning. Because it doesn't, the meaning, whatever meaning there is, it's the meaning that we create for ourselves. Each person has to for themselves. And it's just, in the way I think meaning is created, it's not very complicated. It's just the mood you're in. If you're in good spirits, if you feel satisfied with your life, then you've got all the meaning you could ever find. And it's good enough. I guess I'm very skeptical that there's such thing as enlightenment. Enlightenment is just happiness and just a general overall feeling of well-being. If you've got that, you've got what you need. Sure, you'd like more fame, more money, all this stuff, but you also know that it's going to make much difference and make a temporary difference in your life, but not a lasting difference in your happiness. In fact, what I've heard from guys who got a sudden windfall of wealth, say they sold their company for crazy amounts of money, they were extremely happy that whole afternoon. And then the next morning they wake up worrying, how do I protect it? And the rest of their life is worried sick about losing it, losing this windfall. So they don't end up being any happier than they were. I'd still rather, that'd be great to be discovered by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I'd love it. But it's just not going to, me and 99% of all the other artists in the world, it's never going to happen. Really, for every artist who's on the wall at a major museum, there's thousands more who are never recognized, who are probably as good and sincere and hardworking, really good, and oftentimes much better. It's okay. We don't, if you're really concerned about justice in the world, or expecting justice, concerned about it, yes. But expecting it to happen, you're just going to be disappointed because it really does rain on the wicked farmer just as much as the good farmer. And there is no particular rhyme or reason to it. It's random. And we just have to accept that. But the philosophy I really admire, which is pretty much in vogue now, it's everywhere you look, really is Stoicism. And very well articulated by the Roman emperor, which is surprising, Marcus Aurelius. Maybe there were 5 good Roman emperors out of the 200. And he just says over and over in his meditations that just accept and even love the things that happen to you that are outside your control. The things that are outside your control, you can't do a thing about. Okay, the most obvious example would be, say, the weather. Can't do a thing about it. It's going to do what it does. But you make the best of it and don't let it dampen your mood because it really has nothing to do with you. What matters is how you handle it. Good luck and bad luck. Oftentimes when great fortune falls in the lap of people, it sometimes, we've all heard stories of how it ruins their lives and how rock stars go crazy and trash out hotel rooms because it's just the reason they're maybe would have been perfectly well-balanced people, but this was such an unnatural thing to have happen, that level of attention, because throughout evolution, we'd maybe know 30 people in our lives. And that extraordinary amount of fame and wealth is just something that you'd never be prepared for and have no way of dealing with. And I think it's remarkable that anyone handles it with equanimity and vision and the long range and an acceptance and an awareness of the fleeting nature of it. And a few very famous people do really successfully with that. But I think it ruins the lives of a lot of people.
Yeah.
Especially if it hits young, because you're just not able to cope with it.
Right.
Yeah, you don't have the coping skills for it yet. Yeah.
You don't have a basis of comparison.
Right.
We'd all rather have it than not. I don't want to pretend.
Money buys you comfort and convenience, but it definitely doesn't buy you happiness.
Buy me love.
Yeah. Right.
Pop songs can lead you astray, but they got that particular one right.
That's the truth. Amen. So where you're at right now as an artist, are you happy?
I am.
You're content?
You know what? I wake up in the morning, I look and the world looks beautiful to me. Sure, there's plenty going on that's unfortunate and injustice, and there's all that, but look out and it looks beautiful to me. So I think that's a simple measure of well-being. A lot of that has to do with having gotten a good night's sleep, not drinking too much wine, getting a little exercise. I think sleep has more to do with happiness than anything, in my 2 cents. Sleep and exercise, just those things that are available to everyone. Those do a lot more for happiness than anything else I know of. So it's kind of, in a way, it feels like my state of mind is manipulated by external things like that. Although those are within my control generally. Go to bed early, get up early, exercise, eat halfway decent. But you could just as well take a pill for it too, and be happy that way. And I don't knock it that anti-anxiety pills really help people who need them. But luckily, I just don't. What would you guys say?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right on. Sleep is so huge, and being healthy, get those endorphins running. I think that has more to do with being happy than anything. I've always maintained that, if you're not happy within, nothing that happens in the external world is going to make you happy. You got to find that happiness within yourself.
That's the whole point of Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus or Zeno, all those philosophers, and it's still going strong today. And Nietzsche is the one who I think coined the term amor fati, to love your fate. And his fate wasn't that happy. I think it was very frustrating and sad and lonely for him. But he found a way to love it because it was his.
Yeah.
It wasn't what he wanted, but it was his reality. And I think strangely, maybe through that, you did find happiness. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't want to pretend to be knowledgeable of 19th century German philosophy, but I am on the most superficial level, I would say.
Have you had to sacrifice in order to get to where you are at this place, this happiness?
I don't really feel like I have. There's always the road not taken. I didn't, I miss out on a lot of things, like things that are fun, like skiing and camping and, social events and a lot of things that would be fun, and just too preoccupied with work to go do those things. But it's my choice of activities. On the outside, it would be a sacrifice. I mean, a view from outside. So I don't like vacations. They make me uptight. I feel like I'm losing time if I'm on a vacation. I need to be like a vacation. If I have paints with me, I'll be happy. But if I'm having to entertain somebody, it will be for a little while, but not for long. And so I find it's better for me to travel by myself, to take paints, because the fact is, reality. To do the art the way I want to do it, it requires being a self-centered person. I am. And I used to deny it, but I don't anymore. I think to dig deep, you give up a lot of other things, and you are self-centered. I hope there's a little difference between that and selfish.
Well, I think the difference between selfish and self-centered is usually with selfish, you're hurting somebody else, or you're neglecting or ignoring someone else. But when you're self-centered, it's just, what you need to do, and you're really focusing on that. And a lot of the outside stuff maybe doesn't matter. But so I would say that's kind of the basic gist of it, is being hurtful to others and being, I guess, knowing where you need to be to do what you want to do. As an artist, you're doing this pretty much, I would think most artists do it in their studio by themselves. They're creating by themselves.
It's a lone pursuit.
Yeah. It's like being a writer. You're stuck in a room and you're pounding on the keys, but you can't have a lot of external exigence going on around you, or you're going to be distracted and never get it done. So I think it's, even to say it's self-centered, I know where you're going with it, but I don't even know if it's that. It's you have a pursuit, and the fact that you also know that this is what you do. It's who you are, in essence. Does that make sense?
Yeah. There's selfish, as if you're like, a zero-sum game. You have to win, and other people have to lose for you to win, and it's not like that at all. It's no, exactly. But you just have priorities,
right?
And you know what you want to do, and you're not hurting anybody else. Definitely don't want to do that. It might be a disappointment to other people. It can be hard on relationships. But there's some of that. You know what? I'm just doing it, and I don't. Maybe I have a choice. Maybe I don't. I'm not sure if I do have a choice.
Sorry, Wes.
No, go ahead.
Oh, both of us have watched the PBS documentary that was done on you, and they talked to your ex-wife, and she said she knew from the very beginning that your muse was always going to be the art. That's where, where it laid. To some people that would be a sacrifice. I'm sure it was a sacrifice, but it's a choice you make. If you want to achieve what you intend on doing, if you want to have intention and explore what you want to explore, sometimes those are tough choices that have to be made. And I feel like a lot of artists that are great artists, that's the choice they have to make. That's it. They choose their art.
Well, I think it's true. One thing that comes to mind is my former wife knew this tightrope walker called Philippe Petit. Did you ever see this? There's a phenomenal documentary about him. He strung a rope between the two World Trade Center towers in the 1970s, maybe late 70s. And it's a remarkable thing, but he was the most self-centered person in the world. But he gave us back something to marvel at. Really did. And self-centered in the sense that he did use people. He did. In the documentary, it's pretty clear that he had this vision. He knew what he wanted to accomplish, and he used people, but they were willing. So maybe he didn't use them. They were willing accomplices. Because it took a lot of help and cooperation for him to accomplish what he did. It was a caper. He snuck it. They snuck up there, and dodged the security guards and managed to string a rope between the two World Trade Center towers, which is like 1,500 feet up in the sky, and walked across a tightrope. He was an extremely skilled tightrope walker, of course, and he'd practiced day and night since he was born to be an excellent tightrope walker, which, of course, I couldn't make it 2 steps. But I just admire passion like that. And he was going to do it hell or high water. And he did. So, I think probably Sargent was like that. I don't think it had much in the way of relationships. He just knew what he wanted to do. I think he was also very socially adept and, a wonderful companion when he was around, and he'd be gone. It's fine. Those people contribute to the world, and I guess I hope to be a contributor. In fact, in art, I think, as self-centered as it is, I'd like to think I'm doing it for other people. Not necessarily to give them all the artwork. It's but I hope for just enjoyment. Enjoyment, maybe, you know how it is. If you hear a beautiful song, you're moved. You feel it in your heart. And that's all I would hope to accomplish in art. Just a momentary heart flutter from a viewer. If you can accomplish that in painting, I think that's really hitting the target. That's doing what you want. I don't see what more you could accomplish. It is for other people. And now, to our artists who claim, I only do this for me, I don't care about anybody else, I just don't really believe them. Now, I see a guitar in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Music would be, I would like it, I can see a lot of it, how it'd be wonderful to be a musician because there's a social quality about it. It's very social. And you can play with other guitarists and drummers and piano and we have a group kind of collaboration, which would be beautiful. And that doesn't really happen in painting, not much. Although Lee Labier and I are talking about it, and I'd really like to do that. That would be a real rare thing for me, though. It's like maybe, I don't know if I've ever collaborated with an artist.
This sounds like it interests you.
It does, because I think in this case, what I hope that we do together, what I envision is that somehow, like, I'd be the mechanic and she could be the driver. If it's a car, I'd be the one who I'd keep it running. Keep the wheels working, and she could take it the direction she wants. That's how I'm envisioning it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting, because that means that for someone that has worked 40 some odd years doing their own thing, to give up some of that with another person, that's a special relationship that you have to have with that person. And I could see that, collaboration with Lee would be pretty fantastic. She's got some fantastic ideas, and she's a deep thinker. Well, and you're a deep thinker. So I think that sounds like a good match to me.
Well, thank you. I think that would just be fun. That's how I'm picturing it. We haven't even started.
So it's still in the idea phase, just having conversation about it.
But I kind of like playing a supporting role sometimes instead of being the lead. Because I get to be the lead all the time in my little one-man show. So I'd be really glad to just be support for this time.
So let me ask you this. In almost all your painting, I always feel like, and this is my own perception, but there's definitely a narrative that I feel. There's a narrative with the still lifes. There's a narrative with your portraits. Is there intention behind that?
Not really. I'm glad it seems that way. I'm really glad. There probably is to you, but maybe not to everybody. but then again, not everyone has aesthetic receptors. Just like I don't have receptors for a great deal of our culture. I have nothing against it. I just am oblivious to it. But so I don't. That's so I don't judge. But I think maybe a minority of people have really tuned reception to aesthetics, and maybe I'm all wrong about this, but that's the way it seems to me that. Yeah, I'd rather be wrong about it, but the narrative, it would be, it's sort of. I mean, it wouldn't be a step-by-step narrative, probably, but a kind of a glimpse of some other world operating beneath the surface. What tell me what you mean.
So I look at your paintings, and it's like a still frame out of a film, and I look at it, and I can envision a story pre that frame, and then what's going to happen next after that frame.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate it, Todd.
Yeah, and I think kind of relating to that is a lot of the portraits that you've done, they're not what you would consider the traditional, posing portrait. There's a lot of, they're definitely in the middle of something. A lot of times they have their eyes closed, or they're like I'm looking of the Asian girl who's fixing her hair, pulling her braids back. You catch her in a moment. And I think that leads that tendency to think that there's something more going on than just a beautiful portrait that, like, let's say John Singer Sargent would do, would be very, like the portrait in Colorado Springs of the little girl whose dad was, I think he was a miner or owned a mining company. But she looks like she could step out, but she was really posed. Obviously, you're shaking heads, so you know what painting I'm talking about.
It's very symmetrical.
Yes.
It's beautiful work. But commission work, Sargent got really tired of it, and I don't even do commission portraits. Well, unless one paid well enough. So there goes the purism. I would do it on my own terms, but they necessarily have to be flattering.
Right.
That's who's paying the bills.
Yeah.
And they have a right to get what they want.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the piece that Todd's bringing up on his screen. That's it right there. Obviously, it's a very absolutely gorgeous portrait of this young lady. And, but I can see where Todd's looking at this and saying it's capturing a moment of a bigger narrative. So can you talk about that piece specifically?
Well, I can. I did several studies of her in person. And then I painted this from a photograph that I had taken of her. And I'd been looking at it for maybe a year or so, that the photo I'd taken. And I thought it's compelling and graphic, and it's got the qualities that I want. Mostly was inclined not to paint it because it seemed too simple and obvious. It was just a shoe-in. It was not technically easy, but aesthetically too easy. And I just about didn't do it. But then I thought, things had been lagging for a while. And I thought, I need a hit. And so I did it. And it turned out to be a hit. And I was real glad I did it. And I thought later I learned a lesson from that, thinking that just because something that seems relatively simple and obvious doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I'm contrary to myself, which I don't think I'm unique about in that way at all. It's, sometimes my own obstacle, because I mostly don't do things that are so obvious. But I did this time, and I was glad. And now I wish I would just go ahead and do things that are aesthetically obvious and easy. Aesthetically easy doesn't mean technically easy. Again, it doesn't mean you can't make it profound. I hope. For example, like Sargent's painting of the young girl in a pretty dress. I mean, that's essentially, to describe it like that is utterly superficial. But there's no reason why you couldn't make something like that profound. And I think he did. In The Art of Our Times, to just paint a pretty girl sitting on a bench in a pretty dress, that's an anathema. But that makes me want to do it, because I really do think that you could make it as deep as any other piece. It's because what really it is the subject, no matter what the subject is, it should be a vehicle for your insights. And you know what? That brings me to something that my big complaint about The Art of Our Time is that it hides behind irony. And it's easy to, and that's what Andy Warhol was all about, was irony. But you know something? It's easy to say what you don't mean, but it takes some fucking balls to say what you do mean. It takes some spine. And to be vulnerable, take a risk. And so that's where I part ways with so much of contemporary art. You know what? Tell you the truth, they think they're bold. I think they're safe.
Mm. So since you mentioned the word bold, what makes something like a piece of work bold in your eyes, whether it's yours or somebody else's, Sargent's or who? What would constitute being bold?
Let me think. There's a lot of different artworks that come to mind that are bold. I think Francis Bacon is bold, and I like him for that. That it's kind of scary, in fact, and it's startling. And the artist Nathan Oliveira, his works from the late 1950s. There's maybe a 2 or 3 year period where his work was just striking, bold like that. Bold, I guess, would be defying social conventions. Or there's other ways of being bold would just be dramatic in a big way that's surprising, that's gutsy. And it doesn't mean, I don't mean gutsy in terms of necessarily defying social conventions. It could just be the light shining on the white water on a stream or something, in clear water, but bold in terms of compositional drama. That would be more my area of bold. I'm not really interested in pushing social boundaries because it's just not where I'm at. I'm behaviorally, I'm pretty conservative. I like to go to bed early, and it's pretty average in terms of behavior. Robert Mapplethorpe, okay, that's bold. And first time I saw those, I was shocked out of my wits. I didn't know what, I was flipping through a publication that they were those. I had seen the beautiful nudes and the flowers and the light through Venetian blinds, things like that. They were beautiful, really excellently crafted. And then I saw those homoerotic pieces that I saw it, and I'm sure I turned white as a ghost. Well, I didn't see myself, but I must have. I just closed the book. It shocked me, and it, in a way, I like something that is shocking because it shows me something I wasn't aware of before. I didn't know these things were anatomically possible. And so maybe I didn't look at it for years after that. And then I carefully open the book and look, and I just thought, well, I thought it was human mutilation. Well, in fact, I still think that. I'm very disturbing, but if it's judgmental of me, I'll admit, to say that that behavior is disturbed, but it is disturbed. It's mutilation. Some things that were happening, and I'm sure plenty of people are familiar enough with the works. Hey, And if that makes me socially conservative, I'm okay with that. I'm just basically a good boy that, isn't interested in overturning social norms. My life, my worldview are pretty simple. I respect his boldness. I think it took a lot of guts to do that work. And it took a lot of, I can't imagine the models approving of that, because their identities are, in some cases, are quite clear. I mean, I don't know the people, but they didn't make any attempt to hide their faces. Right. And I admire their guts, mm-hmm. and his guts.
Yeah, he was definitely making a bolder statement. That's for sure. I mean, that's like an extreme. I would see that as almost an extreme definition of being bold. But yeah. But it was shocking, and really even today, some of the images are very shocking and being bold.
Say that about Courbet's Origin of the World.
So which one was that again?
Courbet, Origin of the World. They do exhibit that painting now in Paris. They didn't for probably a century. But times change, and people are, still find it pretty surprising and shocking, but they wouldn't, seek to have it banned generally. I think probably photography is more, the same subject in photography is more shocking than it is in painting. Mm-hmm. There is a painterly looseness in Courbet that gives you a little bit of a break. That could apply to Francis Bacon, who I mentioned, because his works, you can think of subjects that actually help me out here. Some paintings that are very shocking subjects, but they're not.
I think Goya was another one that was, brought a lot of shocking elements to his work.
And I think Bosch in his time.
Bosch is a great example because those are, perversions, yet they're sort of cartoonish, and for that, in that way, they're kind of harmless. But if those were done photographically, it would be much more shocking. Okay, here's a shocking artist. It's Joel Peter Whitman.
I was just thinking about that as you were talking about Mapplethorpe. He's definitely pushes the limit, and the work is bold, but it's also beautiful too. And it's one of those things where you look at it and you're shocked and you want to turn away, but then it's so engrossing that you want to look at it more. You want to see what else he has. I don't know. That's me.
Yeah.
It's true. You can't look away. It made me question myself, because for years I thought a lot of what he did this is long before Photoshop, digital photography. I thought these were darkroom tricks, but they're not. Mm-mm. And it turns out he would go to morgues and pay off, the manager, mortician in foreign countries, Mexico, I think.
Yeah.
And get to do what he wanted with these cadavers. I really just thought it was darkroom tricks. So, that's cool. When I found out it wasn't, it made me question myself, because the picture hadn't changed, but the information about the picture changed. Or it was more about me than about him. And I thought, so what's wrong with me? I thought they were fine before, but now they really bother me. That's a little bit of a problem that I still haven't resolved about the nature of information in visual subjects. Is that, okay, here's another sort of related thing. Say you have your favorite musician, and he's just great. He was so good. But you learn later that he did horrible things to women, cruel. And God, can I listen to him anymore? But you liked him before. It was good before. So I think he's still good. That's the problem. It's still good. If it was good before you had that information, then it has to be good after.
So you can separate the art from the person.
Yes, so you have to. And maybe that's what's going on with Joel Peter Whitkin, is that I separate the art from what was behind it. It's still good. It's something it's searching, it's meaningful, it reflects his experiences in life, his early life, things that, of course, I can't relate to because I had a pretty sheltered life. There was nothing terribly wrong. And but not everyone's been so lucky. But so there's a heyday for psychologists, I suppose. I think that they're his honest expressions. Somehow it does seem honest to me. I don't think he does it just for shock value.
No, right. I agree with you. I think it's an honest. He's just honest in his work, and I don't think you could look at it and see it either or any other way than that honesty. Same with Mapplethorpe. I think that was honest work. It is really shocking. And the first time you see that, I kind of had the same reaction. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody actually did this and that he got some people that were willing to participate in this. And, even after all this time, it is still shocking. It stood the test of time. In fact, my daughter was in New York a year ago in the spring, and I can't remember what museum she went to, but anyway, they had a bunch of Mapplethorpe, and she was shocked. She'd never experienced that.
She didn't know what she was going to encounter.
No, and she said the people that run security at the museum, they enjoy seeing people walk in and experience it for the first time because they get they get to see all these expressions on these people's faces. And if they don't know what they're in for, I'm sure the expressions are pretty, verge on comical to, amazing, like that in itself, seeing people observe his work for the first time. And then you have the contrast of that floral series that he did, which I really love. I think that was just so well executed. And I really do. If you were to tell me, and I'm not a big floral guy, but if you were to ask me to choose somebody's work that, displays beautiful floral arrangements in kind of a very contemporary modern way, I would say Robert Mapplethorpe, hands down. Like those are stunning photographs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they really are. They are. They're beautifully crafted. They're heartfelt. I think he believed in them completely. Those flowers and the figures and so forth. Here's the thing, though. Socially, if he hadn't done the naughty pictures, we never would have heard of him.
I think you're right. He pushed the envelope, and that's how, he made a name for himself. And I'd be curious to see what kind of work he would have been doing had he survived, had he lived longer.
You're right. If that subject, he would have continued with it, or if that series would have come to an end, and he might have felt like he said all he needed to say about that. Well, we don't know, of course, right. But maybe he would have continued with it.
But going into that same vein, we're looking at Gauguin's work, and there's people questioning whether those images he did in Tahiti should be displayed anymore because they were young girls, You know
what? And I think, okay, so if people appreciated them before, then they should now.
Right.
There's a little too much baggage there. And also, a thing that's, I don't know if young people of our time are able to do this, because not a shortcoming on their part, but because I don't know if it's possible to recognize that things were different then. Okay, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington had slaves. It was the reality of the time. If you read Leviticus and Exodus and Deuteronomy and Numbers, it was a drag to be a slave, but but it was fine to have some. And just I think social change is really slow. It takes many generations, and of course, slavery is the most unethical thing imaginable. It's well, no, maybe homicide's a little more unethical, but it's there, and but humans are a product of their times, and good people can do things. Maybe they had maybe George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, maybe they had some cognitive dissonance about it. Maybe it bothered them a little bit, but this is just part of our economy. This is what we do. And Marcus Aurelius had slaves, and he was the best of the Roman emperors, and led conquest for conquered more territory. And the whole purpose of which was to, get tax money, levy taxes and tribute money and occupied territories into essentially indentured servitude. That's what really all the Romans did everywhere, not just in Palestine. You know what? That's just what you did. And in some ways, I don't entirely fault them for it. That's what they thought we would have done the same things. Here's what worries me, is that in much more recent times, say, I'm of German descent. So I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1953. But what if I was born in Dusseldorf about, say, 30, 40 years sooner? Maybe I would be yanking Jews by the neck, push them into trains where they were going on to concentration camps. I would hate to think I would do that. We don't know because we weren't there and we weren't feeling the pressures of those times. And so any one of us could have been behaving in those ways at those times.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the times that kind of dictates how evil you can actually be, because you're put in this specific situation. You don't know how you're going to behave.
You don't till you're tested.
Yep.
Now there are advantages to getting older because we've seen more and we've had a chance to rehearse in our minds how I behave if encountered this situation. But when you're young, you haven't had time to, and that's why they like to draft 18-year-olds, because they haven't had time to form, their moral complexity that is needed to live an ethical life. And those poor young men who go to war and they come back, and many times they're traumatized, not just by what happened to them, but by what they themselves did. Mm-hmm. And that's why they don't want to talk about it, and you can't blame them. But they put in a situation where they had to do, morally repellent things.
Right. Yeah.
And we would have too, maybe. I hate to think of it. So I feel blessed. Maybe that's why I can wake up in the mornings and feel life is beautiful. Because I haven't been traumatized. I haven't been forced into war or, forced to kill or be killed, or any of the things like that destroy people's lives. So I've had it lucky and glad, of course. And so in say expressionist artists of the early 20th century, had say Katie Kollwitz. So horrendous things happen, and it's reflected in her art. It's nightmarish. And my artwork's not nightmarish because I haven't experienced those things. And thank God I haven't. And I want to experience them. I'm going to take her word for it. It's terrible. So she's gone places that we don't have to go.
Right. So back to the whole idea of the 20th century art. I think a lot of 20th century art was very commercial. And our society as a whole had kind of changed. We kind of touched on it earlier in the podcast, where, with fame and money, that kind of changes everything. And art at some point, I think it invaded the psyche of artists, especially in the latter part of the 20th century, right?
Well, in a really broad perspective, I think humans are susceptible to conformal pressures. And, when you look historically at art, it's startling how, artists conform to the zeitgeist of the time. Everywhere throughout history, it's the greatest art and the worst art. They've kind of conformed to the shared consciousness of the time. And that, and thinking of Renaissance painting, thinking of Greek sculpture, which I think is sublime. I'm thinking, and Renaissance painting, 1,400 years later is sublime. And Rococo, why does everybody conform? In the 20th century, everybody's conformed. Except me.
I don't, you're not making a statement. There's a story there, like I said before, that I feel there's a narrative, and you delve into some things that are really difficult to do. Still life is extremely difficult to pull off.
It is, and to make it interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting. I could stand there and look at any of these pieces and be engrossed for a long period of time, just trying to assess what exactly is going on. And you say that there isn't always intention there, as far as at least with your portraits. How about with the still life? Is there's some pieces that I see in different paintings that I got to believe that there's some intention behind, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, there is, but I think it's largely subconscious. You've pointed out something. I painted this about sometime in the way back in the 20th century. But I think I appreciate you bringing that up. I like that painting. I think it's got kind of an uplift about it, and optimism, and kind of a psychological narrative rather than a storyline. And I think it's about something. I think it's about a rising spirit. Now, this plant, that Scheffel plant, it's impossible for them to have those attenuated limbs. I did that for compositional reasons. And I think it was a good choice. And I don't always, limit myself to plausibility. When I say that everyone conforms but me, well, actually the ones who got attention conformed. And I would say that about abstract expressions. Now, every one of them is different, like Clifford Still is different from Willem de Kooning, it's different from Jackson Pollock, it's completely different from Ad Reinhardt, who's entirely different from Mark Rothko, and yet, on the other hand, and who's entirely different from Franz Klein. Yet they've conformed in a way that, not in an overt visual way, but in the sense of what they were doing, it's abstract expressions. And they could just as easily fire back at me and say, well, you've conformed to, 19th century naturalism. And I don't care if it's true or not. Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't. Well, it's true. It is true. That's huge inspiration to me is 19th century naturalism. Artists who really never got attention. They were entirely overshadowed by French Impressionism, but they were contemporaneous, such as an artist called Jules Breton, Léon Bonnat. I don't pronounce French correctly, so I know I'm pronouncing them incorrect. There's Jules Dupree. There's an artist called Pascal Dagnon Bouveret, Bastien Lepage. They're good artists, and their works are in museums, but they're not at all, favored, like Monet and Renoir, Degas. of the Impressionists, who I think is also a conformal group, they're not exactly all the same. I think Degas drew beautifully. For me, Monet is a lazy artist. What? He produced hundreds of things. He was always working. It's true, but I just think it's kind of like cotton candy for me. And I like artists who dig deeper. Degas did. I think Vincent van Gogh dug deep. He was a desperate soul seeker. He was on fire and he was in pain. And he spoke his truth, I think, in pain. There was actually my favorite artist of that entire period he's known, but nowhere near the top as Fantin Latour, who mostly is known for flowers and some figurative works, some portraits. He did portraits of Manet and Renoir and all of the artists, and it was accepted in their circles, but he painted in a more traditional academic style, which is a way that it was fair to describe my work. It's a traditional academic approach, naturalistic approach. That's just what I'm interested in. That's what I like. There's nothing else that I love as much. There's, I should say I love Renaissance painting. In my heart, when I go to museums, it's probably my favorite work. But there's no way I can paint like that linear style of say, Roger van der Weyden and Jan van Eyck and Bosch, who came a little later. Hans Holbein is later. Hans Memling, I think, is one of the most beautiful artists of all time. I paint more like a 19th century naturalist painter, even though I would say I love the Renaissance painting more, those Flemish paintings. And in Italy, it would be Mantegna and Giovanni Bellini would be pretty much my favorite artists. Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, who came a little later. Before, I'm just going a little blank. The early artists of the 1400s in Italy were really quite sublime.
I know you mentioned that I've read that you work with a lot of contrast. How does that play in your work?
Well, I can answer that on a technical level is black against white. For example, this painting that we're looking at on the floor, there's real dark black and right against a white object, and I'll have used the whole palette. And that's when an artist told me that when I was really young, and it made a huge impression on me. And I've done it pretty much ever since, is go all the way from black to white. For some reason, artists don't do that. But I think it's just like, give it everything you've got. Now, of course, it depends on the subject too. For example, if you're painting something that's far away, there's not going to be any black darks, because the blackest black can, because we have an atmosphere on Earth, the blackest black can only be up close. And it gets progressively a little lighter in the distance. And now, I just sort of caught myself saying something that's sort of ironic. It's like a dark, dark. It doesn't make sense if you're not an artist. Dark, dark, what do you mean dark, dark? Dark is dark. Or like, say, like white from the tube or black from the tube. Where in the heck else does it come from? But what I mean is that it's unusual to use an undiluted color, such as black or white or cadmium red. But I do use them, unadulterated, right from the tube, sometimes in small quantities. But I'll use probably more black in a painting than artists might typically use. A larger quantity, because I like to give it some force, black against white. It's drama. And I like that. I like that, strong contrasts. But however, there are artists who used I should say those are value contrasts. Now, if you use a lot of value contrast and a lot of color contrast in the same picture, you're headed for something garish. It was a rule really spelled out to me, and I thought it was, rules are bullshit. The fact is, it's just consistently true. It has held up. For example, to be fair, there are very beautiful paintings by Monet, and a painting with, say, a cathedral at dusk, the Rome Cathedral that he painted so many times. There's one particular one at the Musée d'Orsay that is sublime, and there's very little value contrast, but there's a lot of color contrast. It just warms and cools, and he picked that, and he made it. So there's not a lot of value contrast, and it really is quite beautiful painting. Generally speaking, when you throw in a lot of color and a lot of value contrast, it's a train wreck. And I guess I know because I've screwed it up so many times. And what I try to do in my pursuit of beauty is use as much as I can and still have it tasteful. And the trick is to recognize, for me, to recognize within myself and my own work when I've kind of stumbled into something that's kind of garish, that has gone too far with the drama. And then there comes a time when understatement is more beautiful than overstatement. So it's a wrestling match. Have Jacob and the angel. It's never going to end.
It's always trying to strike that balance, right?
It is. And you know what? That balance is entirely personal, because I'd like to think that aesthetics have a universality and a consensus. And they do to a large extent, but they don't completely. And that's something that I don't think most people would concur with. That they'd say that it's entirely in the eye of the beholder. And I just don't think that's true. That there's a much more consensus than might be expected. And a consensus isn't entirely wrong. It's not entirely right either, but it's that I think, generally speaking, people are not stupid. And that when a lot of people respond to a particular piece of artwork within, say, a given group of pieces, you're choosing between a selection of pieces. Maybe everyone else in that museum would fall in love with the same Monet that I did. I've carefully qualified what I said, because by saying within a specific group, because if people could think that some very garish sentimental things are quite beautiful, but I'd say I'd give them a break because they haven't been exposed to more sophisticated or I should say more profound things. For me, the most profound painting is probably Renaissance painting. Carlo Crivelli, Montaigne. Those are really suffering and profound and deep paintings that I don't think Boss is that profound. I think he's kind of comic, but I love him completely. But different artists do different things.
A friend of mine once said, and I thought this was pretty profound, he was a big collector, and he kind of was giving me a little advice. He said, you don't need to know about everything. He said, you don't need to be an art historian. The bottom line is when something is good and you see it, you'll know it. And I've always kind of taken to heart, like, when you see something good, and it doesn't matter. And like you were kind of alluded to you show a crowd of people a body of work, they'll respond if it's good, right?
I think that's pretty good advice from that collector. And he's just telling you to be true to yourself and don't listen to critics so much. Because critics, like every one of us, have agendas. They have, they're going to push things that have some personal gain from, as much as they try to be objective. I think that was really good advice. Along those lines, I read in a book by the author Dennis Dutton, in a book called The Art Instinct. He wrote about tribal pieces from New Guinea, and that connoisseurs, collectors, curators from the United States and Europe, paid a lot of attention to these works, which are really quite amazing things. And the works that they culled to a lot of works, and the works that they preferred coincided with the same ones that the New Guinea tribesmen preferred. Independent conclusions. And that is what I would call consensus. They were also the ones that the tribal peoples thought were superior, in a field of connoisseurship among those works. And so I think that humans aren't stupid. That there's a consensus about beauty. And it's not 100% consistent, but there's something to it. Amongst my own works, my favorite pieces happen to be other people's favorites too, which is kind of annoying sometimes because the only ones I can sell happen to be my favorite ones, which I would really like to keep. But those are the only ones that people want to buy. So I sell them to them.
That's got to be difficult when you put so much time into something and you really enjoyed the experience and you enjoyed the final product, and then you have to turn around and sell it.
Yeah, but I do it because I want to be represented by my best work, not by my second best work.
Sure.
So it's better to let it go. And so I'll keep the second best work for myself and let other people have the best work.
Let me ask you this. This is kind of a more of a personal question because art is personal, but are you particular who those pieces, those top tier pieces go to?
No, I can't say I am. Once you decide to sell it, it's outside your control, and generally a dealer sells it, and you really have nothing to do with it. I wish I was in position to be that fussy, but I'm not. It depends. At times, there's been times when I've been more prosperous than I am now, and so maybe then I could be more selective and be a hot dog prima donna. But times change, and not just because of COVID. It's been changing really for about the last 5 or 10 years. It's been quite a difference, and as far as I can see, it's been more difficult for artists in my genre. So now I'm not in position. I am in position to be demanding about my price. And if I have a really good piece that I know is top notch, and I have a strong feeling it's going to be popular, because I get a consensus of people coming to the studio, and boom, they'll just go to that piece. Everybody who walks in ignores everything else, and they go to that piece. And the truth is, it's my favorite piece also. And so I'll make damn sure I get top dollar. And somebody, tries to get a penny off, and I won't fucking give it. I've set the price, and I won't come down 1 cent because, I'm a little arrogant and proud and all those things. Those pieces, it brings it. And it usually doesn't take long. In answer, it's sort of the nature of the question is kind of flattering. Whoever steps up first, they get it. And it's just like real estate or anything else that's for sale in the world. Whoever shows up with the dollar bills first, they get it. And sometimes you have somebody you really like who you would have preferred to have it, but they linger and they say, it's not really worth what you're charging. And then some, buddy you have less respect for, say, or less affection for, they come up and they put the money on the table. They get it. And your friend doesn't. And hey, got to teach them a lesson.
I love that.
I love that too. as Raglan would say, you got to heat and eat.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with sticking to your guns. And as an artist that we recently talked to said, you're not just buying this particular piece, this thing that you worked on for however long time. You're buying that experience of that artist, every brushstroke that was put on there, and all that experience for however long you've been painting has led up to that particular piece. You're paying for that experience. And I thought that was pretty insightful.
Your whole life has led up to that moment.
Right.
If you're really paying attention and you're giving it your best as an artist. I know that I have to do good work, I have to be as sharp as I can be. I have to have gotten good sleep. I have to feel really good, or the work won't be the best. And it's really evident in my work. I have, some pretty crappy days of work. And it's pretty easy to attribute the cause. So a lot of time it's just lousy sleep. Speaking of which, it's my bedtime, guys.
All right.
And I really appreciate it, though. You guys are so nice, and your interview questions are really thoughtful. And I appreciate all of the time that you've taken to look at my pieces. And
we just really appreciate the fact that you're willing to take the time out of your evening. But and I'll speak for myself, and I know Todd feels this way, but your paintings are phenomenal, and I just love each and every one of them. There's just something about them just speaks to me, and I can't help but think back to John Singer Sargent when I see him, and it just brings me joy to see truly beauty that you're bringing forth. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you, Wes. That's really kind. And I really appreciate your attention. And I appreciate what you're doing for a lot of artists, that, giving people a voice. It's very generous of you.
Well, it's generous of you to take time out of your evening. And yeah, like you said, it's getting towards your bedtime and you want to be fresh so you can go, produce some more work tomorrow. But there's I can't say it enough. It means a lot that you're willing to take a couple, 3 hours or whatever it's been out of your evening to spend that time with us, because time is precious. And kind of like what you alluded to before, it's the one thing that, that you can't get back. So the fact that you were willing to spend time with us, that means the world to us. And
well, thank you.
And it would be great if sometime in the future we could have you on again and continue this conversation and talk about whatever work you're working on at that time.
That'll be great. I'd look forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, Daniel Sprick, thank you so much. And you can find his work at danielsprick.com. Please check it out. I will have all that information in the episode notes. And for the Tenet Podcasts, I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great week.